Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and on this episode, we hit the Detroit Lakes, Minnesota to talk early ice crappies with Tony Mariotti. Tony's a ice fishing maniac, loves chasing down crappies. So much great information packed in every single minute of this show. Super lucky to have Tony on this week's podcast. Tony.
Yes, sir. 1 second. Okay.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, I'm back.
Awesome, man. Perfect. Well, hey, Tony, welcome to the show. I just want to jump right in here. You know, we kind of already collaborated a little bit on what we're going to talk about, but I did want to ask you right off the bat, how do you describe yourself in the industry? Like, how is it that you interact within the fishing industry?
I think what my tax lady calls it is I'm an outdoor educator and promoter. You know, just that I'm out there sharing the information. I was a former school teacher, teaching others and sharing information, you know, on some of the tournament anglers and things like that. Sometimes you have to protect your spots a little bit more. I'm fortunate to live in an area with 420 lakes within 10 miles of my house. There's always community spots. I'm willing to share, information and get people involved.
And that being said, Tony, right off the bat, we'll get this started. Topically, I told you I wanted to talk about early ice crappies specifically. What are some of the things that pop into your head right away when I mention early ice crappies?
Ice safety and green weeds, sunny days, trying to cover some ground because you can lay the groundwork for a successful long season by getting on them, right at first ice.
Deep dive into that a little bit. Like, what are the things that you anticipate the most? I mean, what do you visualize when you visualize success on early ice crappies on some of your favorite lakes over there?
I visualize weed lines, cabbage specifically, and also transitions from different types of bottoms, where if I can go from a bottom or a gravel bottom to a muddier, weedier bottom, a lot of times I'll find those fish right on those edges of the transitions. But definitely I am looking for the greenest weeds, the weeds that were looking good, the weeds that were getting beat up by musky fishermen during the fall. Those are the areas that tend to have early ice crappies come into.
It sounds like you're fairly detail oriented when it comes to your strategy on finding your spots. So, that being said, any more good information on that? I mean, you mentioned an overlap with some species in the summer, like, muskies usually do plant themselves on the best spots on the lake. I mean, is that kind of true with that early ice crappies? I mean, is there other species? Is there other overlap that you are looking for sometimes when you're trying to find those good productive spots?
For sure. When I'm looking for a good spot, and we've said it, many times, that when you find life, you are going to be successful. You can fish a lot of areas that you might not see fish, you might not catch fish, but it seems like when you get into an area especially when you're being successful at locating these crappies, there's life there. There's pike, there are bass, there's sunfish, there's, rock bass, the crappies. And what I find is if I can find an area with life, I'm going to be way more successful throughout the season. But by getting on them that first ice, I can continue to move with them as the season progresses. A lot of times early ice like this, I'm actually, I prefer a sunny day where I feel as though these cabbage weeds, it seems like the crappies bury themselves into the cabbage. A lot of times the bluegills are kind of above, and one of the tricks or one of the harder things to do is to get through that cloud of bluegills and get down to those active crappies. I feel like when the sun is out, I'll use a larger search type lure. These new Tika minnows I got to play with last year, and they were phenomenal for exactly that. They allow the presentation, they give a big profile. And before that, I used a lot of times, I'd look for more of a horizontal jig. There was a jig out, the duckbill drop, that it's a horizontal jig, but I would team it up with like a big plastic, a Mackie Minnow XL. And to me, it gave the profile of a bigger minnow. And a lot of times that's what those crappies seem to want. You get that bait to, get through those sunfish. Now you're hitting close to the cabbage, and that larger profile allows those fish to see it and come screaming out. And a lot of times that's where I'm successful with the crappies. Again, you're still going to catch your bass, you're going to catch your pike, and you will have some bluegills picking around. But for most bang for your buck, it seems like if you can get those larger baits down to them, a lot of times that's what's going to put the biggest crappies on the ice.
That was kind of my next question was, at what point are you making decisions on finding spots and choosing methods to target the big fish versus the smaller fish? I mean, a day out catching numbers of eater fish is a fine day of crappie fishing, but it is a lot of fun to catch a big fish. So, what would be some of your decision-making process when it comes to when you're searching for big fish specifically versus maybe, kind of the more average, run-of-the-mill community spots?
Absolutely. And I think that what you just said is key, because I get asked a ton, where are you catching fish? Where can I go catch some crappies? And I love sharing spots. I love sharing information. And I'm fortunate to live in an area with 420 lakes within 10 miles of my front doorstep. There's plenty of bodies of water. But if I'm targeting big crappies, I'm talking, I'm looking for those 14, 15-inch crappies. I'm targeting specific lakes that have the ability to grow those big crappies. Not every lake has that potential. There are lakes around here that, you might get a few, but for the most part, you're going to catch 10, 11-inch fish, maybe a 12-incher on occasion. So I'm looking specifically at some of the DNR netting data, some of the lake finder information on what's the size structure in there. I also spend a lot of time on little, like I call them hidden gems, little lakes that, some of them might only be 80 acres, or some of them might be quite a bit larger, but I'm looking for lakes that maybe don't get a lot of pressure, that nobody really I ever hear talking about. You don't see anglers out there. And let me tell you, I strike out a lot. You go out and, it's one of those go big or go home. I've had lakes where I've drilled, 200 holes and caught nothing but 8-inch crappies. I've had lakes where you've drilled 20 holes and landed on some 14-inchers. And so I think that picking the lake, you need to do a little bit of research, and you also need to, have a little bit of luck, look at some things. You can learn a lot about a lake by looking at overhead satellite imagery. I can, see the weed lines. I can see the deep holes. And for crappies throughout the season, I feel as though it's that early ice, I'm focused much more on the weeds. And it might be the inside edge, it might be the outside edge, depending on the day or even the lake. But as the season goes and those fish move out to those basins, over those deep basins, roam. And a lot of times by looking at aerial photos, you can find those transition areas, and it can really cut your learning curve down a lot.
Is there any information that we could be paying attention to in the open water season that could carry over into early ice for crappies?
For sure. And that is an area that if you're not doing it, you're missing a huge, huge tool. We spend a lot of time out here in Lakes Country. As a family, we spend a lot of time on the pontoon. And I can tell you that come even July, August, September, as we are taking pontoon rides, I am paying attention to where the cabbage beds are. You can physically look over the side of a pontoon or a boat, and you can see these cabbage beds. Most of them are in anywhere from, 9 to 14 feet of water. And with the aquatic invasive species of the zebra mussel that seem to be quite prolific around here, the clarity in most of our lakes is such that you have no problem seeing down to those cabbage beds at 14 feet. Another thing that I do is I pay attention to the musky anglers. Musky anglers are usually dialed in. They are a breed of guy or gal that, they know little nuances and they know things. And I've learned that musky anglers spend a lot of time looking at cabbage weeds. And I watch where the musky anglers are casting. And then I might, once they clear out, I might head over there and just make a note that, yep, there's a cabbage bed here. Come first ice, that's where you're going to find me. I've already done my scouting. I don't need to go out and start searching for weeds that I don't know the location of. I've got them marked. It makes me much more efficient and much more effective as an angler.
talking about those spots when you're dissecting these spots, some of this stuff might be completely second nature to you by now in your career for sure. But, talk a little bit about crappies themselves when you're seeing other species on your Vexlar, or on your flasher. How are you distinguishing in this productive water if what you're seeing is crappies? And I suppose you got to drop a jig down and catch them in some cases. But distinguishing the crappies that you're after, the target species versus other species, and how do you distinguish that? I mean, where are they at in the water column in comparison to other stuff, and that sort of information?
Sure, and that's that can be very lake dependent. I have one of my favorite crappie lakes here. It is completely opposite of what the norm is. Normally, if you get into fish, your higher marks are going to be sunfish, and your lower marks are going to be crappies. And a lot of times as an angler, I'm focusing on those crappies, so I'm trying to get my jig through the sunfish on top to get them down to those crappies. I have one particular lake that the crappies are almost always above the gills. And so, in that sense, this doesn't hold true. But for the most part, when I turn on my flasher, I will turn it to low power mode because I'm usually under 15 feet of water. I'll turn my Vexlar to low power mode, and that'll zap the weeds, and I will have distinct marks, usually 4 to 8 feet off the bottom, especially in those weeds. As they move deeper, obviously, those marks come up higher. But in that 14 feet, a lot of times if I put my flasher down and I see, a mark at 6 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, I know I have 3 crappies down there. They're typically off the bottom. Now I've seen catfish do the same thing. I've seen, I have been fooled, but as a general rule, if you get into these weeds and you start seeing marks significantly off the bottom, I'm not talking, a foot, I'm talking 4, 6, 7 feet off the bottom. Those are usually the indication that they're crappies, and that's what you're trying to target.
Let's shift gears and get kind of into the strategy and the methods and gear of putting these fish topside. Now, is it a lot of running and gunning early in the season for you? Are you usually trying to team up your day of fishing with a couple other guys just to make sure that you're drilling holes and staying on fish, or can it be a little bit more of a stationary thing? I mean, talk a little bit about that method of that madness.
Sure. A lot of times early ice, I feel as though these fish haven't been harassed much. There isn't a lot of pressure on them in the fall. And so you don't necessarily need to run and gun like you do maybe later in the season or as conditions get tougher. It seems like that early ice, a lot of times, these cabbage beds will literally run, 70, 80, 100 yards at times. And the fish are going to be somewhere along there. So I might have to, drill 6, 7, 8 holes and, check, see if anybody's home. Sometimes you got to drop a jig down to even get them to show up. And then when they do, I can typically stay on them because there's a reason that they're there. It seems like they're feeding. There's good oxygen in those healthy weeds. Seems like they're really hungry when the ice first comes on and you get that temperature change and we now have ice. It seems like the fish want to put on the feed bag for whatever reason. So it seems like when you locate a spot that has fish, it replenishes throughout the day. If it gets to the point where, geez, I've gone 20, 30 minutes and I haven't seen a fish, then, yep, I'm going to head on down the cabbage patch a little bit more and drill my 6, 8 holes and start looking again. When I find them, I might not have to go any further that way. I might be able to come back, to the original holes because they do seem to replenish throughout the day.
You touched on it earlier, the horizontal baits, the upsized baits, especially when you're targeting, the bigger class fish. Get into some of your setup decisions a little bit and how that may vary lake to lake. And you mentioned water clarity now, changes. And there's probably been some changes in the last 10, 15 years on some of these, strategies and rules of thumb. But maybe break down kind of what your arsenal looks like, how many rods you usually like to set up, and what some of that stuff looks like, your line choices and things like that.
Sure. Without a doubt, I think we all get our favorite gear. So it's not that you necessarily need exactly this, but what I tend to use is I'm a big fan of that 3 and 4 pound frost line. I like a colored line because as I've gotten older, that fluorocarbon and clear line is getting harder and harder to see. So I like a colored line. I like the oranges, the greens, just because I can see them easily. I don't think that color affects the fish necessarily, unless you're on a super gin clear, 1 pound mono type bite. So I'm using 3 and 4 pound frost line. I have gone mainly with the Jason Mitchell meat stick. It's by far my go-to rod and has been since I was doing tournaments, 15 years ago. That was the rod that I absolutely loved. I also fish outside a lot. So with the advent of the dead meat, I've actually switched a lot of my rods to that. I like the bigger eyelets when I'm outside, but the flexibility and that fast tip and the visual tip on that thing, that's what I'm using. I team it up with one of my little Predator reels or the Jason Mitchell reel, and I am pretty well set there. I probably have 15 of them set up. When I'm on the ice, I typically have 3 rods with me. I will have one with a jigging spoon of some sort, the Tikka minnow, for example. I will have one with. I've been a big fan of the Wonder Bread color of the drop jig. I don't know that color is nearly as important as profile in a lot of cases, but I like that drop jig, or actually the drop jig XL is another one. And then on my 3rd rod, I will have probably some type of a jigging spoon. The blade spoon or rattling blade spoon has been good. Just something, a small spoon, so I can kind of judge what the fish want, what's calling them in, what are they hitting, what's producing, fish come up and look and don't hit. I'm going to not stick with that lure real long, and I'm going to switch it out for something different, maybe a different profile or a different size, and just see if I can find what the fish want that day.
And the technology in these baits anymore, I mean, there's just these soft plastics are so lifelike and all this. What would you say the live bait really kind of comes into play in an early ice crappie situation?
Well, I don't think there's an angler out there that will tell you that live bait isn't going to work or should totally be replaced with plastics. Personally, I don't use minnows at early ice because I feel as though I can mimic a minnow with the fake bait. I don't use a lot of, bob. I'm more actively fishing, so I'm usually only using one rod, and I don't use minnows early in the season. Now, as season progresses, don't kid me or don't kid yourself. I've got, minnows along for when the going gets tough. But I oftentimes have a container of waxworms are usually with me early ice. A small jig and a waxworm sometimes is exactly what these fish want and what you need to get those fish to get active and start a frenzy a little bit. Once I pull a couple out of a school, I might be able to switch, because it seems that once you start catching fish, it kind of gets the other fish fired up, and that school seems to get a little bit more aggressive. And I know we say with perch that I see it all the time, and you see it with smallmouth, but I do think with panfish, sometimes if they just see that, that movement around, it seems to get everything going, and the fish become more aggressive.
A huge segment of the ice fishing population is, drags an ice house out there. They drill a couple of holes and they sit on it, whether it's just because they have maybe a few kids along and it's kind of tough to move a whole lot, or maybe it's just their style. Like, this is their spot. They catch them here every year. As soon as they can drag a house out and drill holes, they watch TV, they kick back, they turn the heater on. What might be some, just some nuance or just recommendations for that, guys that are going to sit and grind? Maybe it's just a cold day and you don't want, your lines freezing up. So, whatever, what would be maybe some decisions you could make in regards to the methods and the gear for the guy that's knowingly going to sit and grind?
We talk a lot about getting out there and doing these things. And at that early ice, I also have buddies that, maybe they only have a couple hours in the evening, or they've bringing their kids out, and they're not going to want to run and gun. They're not going to want to go out and drill even 6, 8, 10 holes. They're going to want to go drill their 2 or 4 holes flip their shack over, whether it's a permanent shack where they're going to be able to turn on the TV, or a portable where they're just going to flip it over, turn the heater on, and they're going to sit and whatever comes by, comes by. And, I get that question a lot where people say, where can I go with my kid and catch some fish? Well, these are the things that I think that scouting a little bit beforehand, maybe seeing where those weed patches are, paying attention to, where you're seeing the musky fishermen, where you're seeing the weeds yourself, that's going to help. Or at least do yourself a favor. And if you're heading out and there's not a lot of people, I would recommend at least looking at a lake map and look for those areas, that are that 11 to 14, 15 feet of water. And, at least you have a better chance at finding weeds there. If you're going to hunker down and sit there, what I would recommend is to use the 1-2 punch. Whether it's, in Minnesota, you can use 2 rods each. So either you're using your 2, or if there's 2 of you and you only want to use 1, make sure your presentations are different. One of the things that I like to do, especially if I'm in an area that, maybe I haven't marked a fish for a while and I don't want to move, what I like to do is make sure I'm using what I could like to call a call lure, something that's going to, make a lot of noise or have a lot of flash and try to call some fish in. A lot of times those lures might be a little too aggressive at early ice, and especially, like midday and things like that. So I'll use one of those lures and really get aggressive, see if I can call in a fish. And if I see a fish, I want my partner or my other rod to have, a smaller presentation. That's where a drop jig with a wax worm, or some type of a horizontal jig that mimics a minnow, and just have that maybe being held still or being jigged much lighter. If I'm by myself, what I'll actually do, and I think Tayler, you got to witness this last winter, when we would use the Tika minnow, which is a real aggressive, call lure, get these fish in. And on the dead meat rod, I had a original Mackie with just a small drop jig, and I just had it sitting there. These plastics nowadays, like you said, they are so lifelike, and the slightest twitch of your line has the tentacles moving. So there's movement down there, and with the dead meat, I'll have my drag set super loose, and I can literally watch that rod start to load up. I'll drop my jigging rod, and I can, tighten my drag and set the hook on that dead meat stick. And a lot of times, and not just early ice, but throughout the season, that 1-2 punch is the real secret and the real trick to, catching more fish and getting these fish topside.
People have invested into a lot of this stuff. A lot of people have, expensive flashers and everything. What would you say are some of the really nuanced settings on there that people need to be aware of, or some of the stuff that's really helping you early ice when you're covering water?
Sure. For me, when I'm out there, I a lot of times will have my GPS unit and I've got my spots marked. Obviously, like I said, I've marked my cabbage beds throughout. For me, I prefer a unit that is the standalone GPS. To me, nothing beats my Vexilar flasher. I feel confident in it. I know what I'm seeing. I know that I'm actually fishing fish. I'm not fishing lines. I'm fishing the actual movement. It's amazing to me how, watching the Vexilar over the years, how I can anticipate, and how an angler gets to see, okay, look, these fish are negative. These fish got scared. This fish is starting to get aggressive. Ooh, that looks like it made that fish mad. And I can physically see that. So for me, using your flasher is paramount in catching these fish. Using a standalone GPS, that allows you to find the break lines, allows you to find the contours, things like that. But for my use, I've discovered, for the most part, the separate units are the way that I feel I am confident in going. It also allows me to continue to fish. If, I want somebody else to go check out, go work the edge of this inside turn right on the end of this cabbage patch. And so I can send the GPS with them. They can walk over, drill a hole, and now we have both ends covered.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. Yeah, Tony, you mentioned something there talking about fishing lines, fishing movement, and reading the mood of the fish. When you do find yourself, for whatever reason, on some negative fish or just some tight-lipped fish, what are some of the decisions that you make to try to get bites? I mean, are you changing up your gear, lure size, things like that? Is there a cadence to it? I mean, what is some of your decision-making process when you're trying to make bites on some tough fish?
Sure. One of the things that I really try to focus on, and I think I do a little bit different than some anglers, is I'm a fan of a big bait. And I know that several times, but I like the large profile. I like bigger baits because, in all honesty, I feel as though the bigger baits usually produce bigger fish. Not always. In the summer, you'll see me throwing a 4-inch power bait on a smaller jig, and I'm targeting crappies. And I've had success doing that. So I carry that over to winter. But one of the things that when I'm using a bigger bait is that's where it's important to watch the mood of those fish, because there are days when things are tough and they don't want a big bait. Maybe I can't even get them to come in. And I know this area should be holding fish, and maybe I'm being too aggressive. Maybe I'm, not being aggressive enough, but sometimes those big baits will scare them. And so what I found is I'll focus. If I have to go down to a smaller bait, I still might, I might not be down to nearly what some people would use. I might be down to, a 1/16 or even a 1/8 ounce bait still. I'm not getting real small yet because I like those larger profiles. The other thing is you really have to focus on what the fish tell you as far as what they want from, we call it the jigging cadence or whatever you want to refer to it as. But to me, it's how you're moving that bait. Are you ripping it up? Are you making small little moves? Are you, jigging it 3 times high and then down low? You just kind of got to play around till what's bringing these fish in? What is making them look? And then how can I refine this to get them to bite? I know I spent a lot of time last winter on the ice with Dave Gens and his daughters. Well, I watched Kathy, and it was amazing because she was catching fish doing something that is the exact opposite of what I was doing. As I was watching these crappies come in, Kathy constantly keeps her bait moving. She's jigging it nonstop until she feels the bite and sets the hook. I jig and jig and jig, and as that fish starts to rise and I feel as though they're coming to get it, I'll hold it dead still, and I want to watch that tip of the dead meat or the meat stick start to bend, and then that's when I set my hook. And we just noticed that, it was 2 different ways we were doing things. Both were being effective. But by, seeing how other people do it, it gives you different options at different times.
I love it, man. I think that's really good information. I want to talk a little bit about some, kind of where are some of the areas that you get out first ice? I mean, what are some of the bites that you anticipate every year that you make time for? Are you hitting all local lakes around Detroit Lakes there, or?
So many lakes in Minnesota hold crappies at early ice, and I'm fortunate to live in an area with a ton of lakes. I live in Becker County. I'm right on the border of Otter Tail County. I literally have access to 1,000 lakes with not a very far drive. And so does everybody else. We're 3 hours from the cities, 3.5 hours. You can be in some phenomenal waters. Early ice, typically, especially down in Otter Tail County and even up in northern Becker County, we have a lot of lakes that are shallow and smaller, so they freeze up quickly. I can about guarantee you we are only a couple weeks away from Dave Gens walking onto Pelican Lake down by Ashby and catching some early ice crappies. It's a very common spot that people like to hit at early ice because it usually has some of the safest ice and some of the earliest ice where you can go out and catch fish. Up in the Cormorant area, Big Cormorant isn't going to be frozen yet, but a lot of the smaller lakes around there, they are destinations that people come up every single year. On Detroit Lakes, we have Melissa and Sally and Lizzie and Lida, and none of these lakes are secrets. None of them are places that you're going to go out and catch limits of giant fish, but they're places where early ice, safe ice, you're going to be able to come out here. Maybe you're only going to be able to walk, but some of them, you don't even have to walk that far. You can walk, 100 yards from the access, pull in your gear, and you're going to be on those cabbage beds. Sometimes literally where people's docks were and where their docks ended, when they were out during the summer are areas that we are fishing for, early ice crappies, and all of the right ingredients are there. So you don't need to overthink it. You don't need to work too hard, because there are a ton of lakes all around Minnesota, and especially in this area, that are going to hold crappies, and you're going to see community spots in all these. You can go to any of the lakes I mentioned, and you are going to see a trail where people are walking out, and there might be 6, 8 guys sitting on buckets. There might be a couple of flipovers. These aren't any secret spots, and you're not going to catch huge crappies, but you're going to have the opportunity to be in an area that have fish, and you're going to get to scratch that itch for early ice crappies.
And I think that's such a great point. That early ice is an opportunity, I think, that maybe gets missed because people are thinking ice fishing. They're thinking basin fish. They're thinking they have to walk all the way to the middle of the lake to find those fish. But the reality is they're still relating to those green weeds that are out there, and it's not that far of a walk. So I think that's a really, really good point. Maybe let's round this out. We're doing really good on time. Let's round it out with any good investments. Every average fisherman usually saves up a few dollars heading into ice season to invest in some new gear. What would be, your bang for your buck investment for early ice crappies in your mind?
Sure. For early ice, I'm all about traveling light. And by early ice, I'm not one of these guys that is the first one out there. I am not out there on 2 and 3 inches of ice. Some people are, and if they're comfortable doing that, that's completely their world. But I like to have at least 5 inches of ice. I feel as though I know the areas that I fish, and I know where the currents are and what things are safe. So 5 inches for me, I am very comfortable going pretty much anywhere. But some of the things that I definitely bring with early ice is I a lot of times will have my float suit on. I always have a throwable rope and cushion, because at early ice, you just never know what could happen. And so I make sure to have a throwable with a rope. And then I'm pulling my one-man shack with all my gear. I feel as though a flasher, my Vexlar is coming with me. I would rather use a hand auger than fish without my Vexlar. And that, whether it's 5 inches of ice or 30 inches of ice, I stand by that. I'm fortunate I have a K-drill with a Milwaukee fuel setup, and I run the 6-inch during early ice and panfish. It allows me to, remain light, yet rip some holes, get out there. If you're using a gas auger, that's just fine, but that's a lot of weight to be carrying out early ice. So truly, on 5 inches of ice, if you have a good hand auger, you're golden. I think more importantly is have a couple of quality rods. And I'm not meaning $100 rods. I'm talking, like the Meat Stick series. There's just some lightweight options that are excellent and affordable. Have some decent line. You don't want 6, 8, 10-pound test. It's just too thick. It's too bulky. I don't think you get the movement or the feel out of your bait. So I'm using, like I said, 3 and 4 pound, a higher caliber line, and then just get out there and go with a buddy if at all possible, and bring your lantern, because sometimes the best bites of that early ice are right as that sun's hitting the trees, and they continue till well after dark. A lot of times I'm fishing on the weekends. I'm fishing during the middle of the day. I've got a young family. I've got 2 kids in hockey, and life is what it is. So I'm maximizing any potential time. So if I can get out, let's say hockey practice is over at 8:30, 9 in the morning, I can be on the water from 10 to 3 before I have another family commitment. And so I like to focus on those weeds during the day. But one of the best kept secrets about crappies is that, well, it's not a secret, that they feed oftentimes at dusk and after dark. And these fish might be harder to pluck out of the weeds at night, but a lot of times at early ice, what I find is I can't always guarantee it's going to be the shallow edge or the deep edge, but a lot of times at dusk, the fish seem to slide out of the weeds a little bit. And I'm guessing it has something to do with a visibility factor. They can probably see better than in the darkened area in the confines of the weeds. So they seem to slide out. And some nights they're on the deep edge, some nights are on the shallow edge. But they'll slide out there, and I've had nights where, these fish start biting right at dusk, and they'll continue till I'll have to leave, let's say I'll fish till 11 o'clock at night, and fish are still there. And I don't know what it is or why it is, but, fishing early ice crappies, I don't worry so much about the basins till after the new year, but I am focusing on weeds and weed edges. And even, 10 feet off a weed edge, for whatever reason, those fish a lot of times will slide right out there, and you can catch them till all hours of the night.
What are some of the rules of thumb that you feel like ring true with crappies as you travel around? What are some of the rules of thumb that just make up a crappie wherever you go? And what would you say are some of the things that maybe, are more nuanced based on, right down to like lake to lake or, one end of the lake to the other?
I've been lucky to be able to chase a lot of game fish around, and a lot of panfish too. And, I've targeted crappies in Minnesota, North Dakota, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Ontario. And it seems like to me, it doesn't matter where we're at, whether we're up on Lake of the Woods, or we are on area lake. That early ice period, and even as the winter progresses, weeds are going to hold crappies. And I'm not, I don't know specifics as far as what type of weed is always best, but around here, cabbage is tough to beat. Pencil reeds, once you get up on some of those shield lakes, it seems like the pencil reeds or the stands of the thicker pencil reeds seem to hold fish, especially early ice and again at late ice. I think that those are things that, whether you're fishing in Minnesota, Wisconsin, or, to our friends in Canada who can't wait to get back and do some fishing there.
Oh,
but
totally.
I think that those are things that, they're the same no matter where you are. As the winter progresses, I also think in a lot of these states and provinces, the basin bite, where these fish move over a basin. And when I'm talking a basin, I'm talking, maybe an area that, there's, it's a 15-foot flat all the way around, or 12 or 17, whatever. And then it drops down into a bowl. And a lot of times around here, those bowls are like 35, 36 feet of water. And those fish seem to suspend and hang out and cruise those basins all day long, and sometimes all night long. And so I think that those are things that are relatively a good tip no matter where you fish. And I also I think one of the things that people think is, I have to do a certain thing to catch crappie, or of course you catch crappies because you know where to fish them. And it isn't that. It's that a person just needs to make the time to get out there. You can go to any of these community holes, and I'm talking, you could go out in front of Zorba's restaurant on Little Detroit Lake, and you have a chance to catch a crappie. I would guess you would catch a crappie. However, if you don't get out there, or you make an excuse and you don't do it, you're never going to catch a crappie. You're never going to be successful, and you're not going to ever get the confidence to go and try other lakes. So I really encourage you, if this is something that intrigues you, get a hold of a buddy that fishes. If you're a fisherman yourself, go out and actually do it. Give it a whirl, and I think you're going to have fun. You're going to maybe learn a thing or two, and you're going to become a better angler.
I could literally talk to you for 2 more hours because I love it. What are some of your social medias? Where can people find some of your content?
Tony Mariotti on Facebook or Instagram.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, thanks again, Tony, for doing this. I think we hit the time that we were shooting for. So, I'll let you back at it, Tony, and good luck this year. We'll be in touch. All right, bud?
All right. Thanks, bud. We'll see you.
Thank you, man. We'll talk to you.
Bye.
And thank you all for following along on another episode of the podcast. If you're following on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure to like, subscribe, share with your fishing friends, and head over to our social medias on Facebook and Instagram at Jason Mitchell Outdoors, where you can recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show.